the Sound Off Podcast with Matt Kundle.
Matt, how are things in the Great White North?
You know, we're having a nice winter. It's not as cold as it has been in past years, which leads everybody to be suspicious that a big flood is coming.
Oh, okay. Come to LA. That's all we've had is rain and floods and mudslides. But on the whole, you can never complain about weather here. So I don't.
You know, I saw a post from you a few weeks ago that you know said that you really look forward to working again with people. And I think in the podcast space, we have really gotten used to working alone, but A, it's lonely, and B, I don't think we get to exhaust as much creativity as we possibly could. And you said, I want to go work with people again.
Yeah.
How'd you get to that spot?
Man, I've been an entrepreneur for, quite a few years now. And, one thing I teach my students in a course that I'm trying to develop for our university is just the mental part of being an entrepreneur. You have months where things are going really good. When I left my last gig and went out to consult, I had more consulting business than I could handle. And then all the doom and gloom happens, and all the repercussions of the overspending and bad caretaking of the podcast industry by some of the bigger players came down, and all of a sudden all the business is gone. And then so that's a lonely place to be anyway, when you're responsible for everything. I never wanted to be a business person. It's just the role I've ended up in a lot of ways. So that's lonely enough as it is. But when you're working from home and you're a people person, and most of us that are in this industry, like I started on air, I've been behind a mic since I was a 16-year-old kid. I like people. And when you're on Zoom and you're having these interactions, that you're having interactions with people, but there's always an agenda and a time limit. And there's none of that walking around and like, hey, I had an idea about something. Let's talk about this. That happens in creative environments. It's happened to radio. Most radio folks work from home now and just record breaks. They don't interact with anybody. And it's happening to our industry. It's happened to our industry. I don't think it's 100% bad thing. Like, remote recording is great. I love it. I do some pilot work, and I've had some folks who want to do live with cameras, and it's a lot of work to do that. But it's also a lot more fun. But just economically, we need to be able to be lean and mean and do things remotely. But boy, do I miss, working at a company where there's resources and people, and you can go down the hall and talk to the salespeople and give them ideas. I think that's important.
In 2021, you were on stage in Nashville at Podcast Movement. Speaking of trying to get together, that was a time when we couldn't all necessarily be together. I couldn't get across the border to go to that, but I did watch you online, and you gave a great little piece on why you should never, ever start a network. And those things that you said in that session ring through my mind every day because I've got a network. And I went to you and I said, Matty, I don't have a network, even though there's a bunch of podcasts that I work with. And then you looked at me and said, are you running cross promos through the network? And I said, yes. And he goes, you have a network. And so here I am with this big network. Let's fast forward a few years though. Do you still feel the same way? And how do you look at networks in podcasting now?
So I let me backtrack. My goal for my talk was not to build a network, but to understand the economics of it and all of the pitfalls. And there are quite a few. If you're not having dedicated sales, if you don't have content that's in the same genre, if you're funding the content, those are all things that are really, hard to do. Today, there is a lot of content out there that are either homeless or at homes that aren't treating them well. Shows that are on, and I love iHeart and, Spotify. They are, big giant networks, but they have shows that if they're not hitting certain numbers, they're not getting paid attention to. So I think, building a network today, if you have a little funding and you can build some new shows and do some owned and operated, There's money there still, but you have to understand it's not the old days. We don't build podcast networks anymore. We build cross-platform networks. We have invested a lot of time into YouTube and understanding it. And I've seen better results on YouTube as far as actual people watching and listening than I have with audio in a lot of respects, because you got to understand people consume content different ways. And if you have a piece of content and, you're building a community, and a community needs to be given what they like, where they like it. The problem is that we have sales and agencies who don't get that. And they're just, what's the easiest thing to do? Oh, let's just sell programmatic and stick it all in there. Let's not convert radio ads into podcast ads. Let's, take low CPMs and just fill up our stop breaks, what happened to radio and why radio is failing, giant stop loads, bad commercials, low-hanging fruit that's not being monetized like video and when in radio's case, podcasts. I just see a lot of that same stuff happening in our industry, and it really worries me.
So I got towards the end of 2023 and I thought to myself, if you have a niche podcast, 1,000 downloads a month, whatever, you're in better shape than the podcast that is trying to get 50 to 100 to 200,000 downloads a month. If you're living over in that spot, it is pure calamity. I feel like, and I see this because I work with a few of these podcasts where we need more downloads. We want to charge a higher CPM. We need more people listening, on and on and on. That world is chaos. Meanwhile, niche podcasts, they go completely unaffected by all the things that we read every day in the news, podcasting wise. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's easier to find if you have a sales, and again, it comes down to sales. If you have somebody who understands what community you're selling and says, hey, I've got 2,000 people that are into, I hate using this reference because I'm a tennis player and I hate pickleball players. But let's say you're focused on pickleball. Well, great. Go to every local pickleball court. Go to every pickleball thing. They'll want 5,000 pickleball players to pay attention to their ads. That's an easier sell, but you have to go out and do it. It's not the same as sitting and taking, okay, well, agency sent in a request for X downloads in this genre. They're not even looking at the shows and what they're putting on it. We have all these great tools like Sounder has for contextual targeting that people aren't using properly, I don't think, as far as really targeting the ads. I mean, I listened to a podcast recently that was about people who went on vacation and they got killed. Every ad that played, it was the same ad. It was for Hilton Honors and going to one of their, and I'm like, is anybody paying attention to what's running on these shows? And they're not. So I would agree with you. The other problem with that model is that there are so many, and I'm just going to say it, bullshit products out there that, yeah, you can get a few thousands of downloads for a few dollars, or a few, less than that. But they're not real. And the RSS feed companies don't give a shit because guess what? They're selling against programmatic. So it behooves them to take these shitty downloads. And it's not all the companies. And I'm going to just say one to get it out of the way. It's not Mopod. But they're expensive compared to some of these other companies. But you get a dashboard and when I test all of this stuff, this is one of the good things about, my position in the industry is when something new comes out, people send it to me and, for good or bad, I give them my feedback, usually for free. But I'll see, if I get 10, 15,000 downloads in a day, that's not real. If there's nobody who's listening before or after, that's not real. Those are bots. You can't tell me they're not. And if you're okay with that, that's fine, but you're not building any community that way. And and it's obvious when you see a podcast that says, oh, we have 100,000 downloads, and you look at their social. And you look at the people who are interacting with the show and there's nobody. Do you really have 100,000 people to listen to your show? Doesn't seem logical to me.
Yeah, so I've seen a few of that as well. A lot of browser traffic, for instance.
It's all browser traffic.
Yeah. In one particular area. Oh, I'm going to drop $50, say, on this app. And oh, look, all of a sudden now I've got all sorts of traffic from a browser, from the same place, all on the same day. I thought we solved this problem with, IAB standards and getting together to filter out this stuff.
Anytime you make a standard, there is some shyster who will find a way around it. And our industry is full of fucking shysters. It is full of folks who are here to do one thing: suck as much money out of this industry as they can and not give a crap about what they leave in the wake. And this is why we are where we are with our industry. It's not the content creators' fault. It's not that people don't like podcasts. It's not that more people aren't listening. It's this end of the industry. And if you look, like when I talk to people who want me to consult for them, all they want to talk to me about is monetization and promotion. And that's great. But they're not, because everybody thinks their content's good. And it's like, let me tell you, I'm looking at your completion rates. And that's the first thing I look at. Your completion rates are under 50%. Why are you wasting money promoting a podcast that obviously people aren't listening to? Because, they want the numbers, and they want the people like to look at numbers. They like to see charts. And they'll pay people to do that for them in nefarious ways. And not always, and let me say this, not always knowing it's nefarious, because the salespeople will tell you anything you want to hear. They will say, hey, these are IAB compliant. These are real listeners. They're coming from here and here. You're going to have, subscribers, all of these things. But the proof's in the pudding. Just run some tests. I mean, it's one of the reasons, my partner and I have, we're working on Podl, is to have a place for folks to leave reviews and actually talk about things that they're using in an honest way, and not have a third party telling them, oh, these products are great. Well, yeah, you're telling me these products are great because people are paying you to tell me these products are great. I can't trust that.
So tell me about Podl, because I'm just learning about this now, and I'm interested because I think I can be a participant in this.
So we launched, so Dante Burney was a student of mine at the Academy of Art University. He was a really good coder, but he was really into, I teach podcasting, and he really wanted to, he was in that. And I was like, I've mentored him over the years, and he's done really big things at LinkedIn and Greenfly, and he runs a lot of the stuff for TMZ now. And I posted it'd be nice if we had a Yelp for podcast service providers. So we started talking about that. And that would have been pretty simple to put together. And there's some people who have tried that over the year, and there's, you can find some stuff like that. But I wanted to build something that's actually really going to be helpful for the industry. So the things that I see in the industry is, right now, there are more freelancers than ever. There are more people who don't know how to navigate that world. And there are a lot of products out there that are fugazi. They're just not real. They're not good. So Podl is a combo Fiverr and Yelp for the podcast industry. When we are done, and here's the thing, when we started building this, we started looking for some funding. There's not much funding out there to come to the podcast industry. And then, the other thing we decided is we really want to keep this third party. We really want to make this something that nobody can influence. So we built it ourselves. We've put all of the dev work in. I've learned so much about developing a marketplace website than I would ever want to know. And it's taken a lot of time. So right now we're importing, about 600 companies that will be in there. So once it's up, if you have a company, you can claim your business for free, and, you can respond to reviews and things like that. If you're a content creator, you can log in and set up a profile so that people can see that you're a real podcaster. And if you're a freelancer, you can go build your freelance industry, the same kind of structure as a Fiverr with, 3-tier, and only pay a 5% commission, which is 15% lower than Fiverr. We plan to not take any money other than, sponsored posts, but, to start, we're not taking any money from anybody. We want to get this out there to folks because I think it's needed. I think people need to have a trusted place, and not just podcasts, also YouTube, that you can go and see what people are saying about these products, and not have to go to a million, chat rooms where, it's some dude who's been podcasting for 5 days posts all the time about products, and they don't even know what they're talking about. Like, someplace where you can feel like it's legitimate.
Tell me about AI, because I follow you. And one of the nice things about following you is that you tell me about all the new toys that are out there. So what are some of the things that you see in AI that can really help a podcaster make their life better?
Oh, so many things. So, AI is really good for writing and getting started on projects. For me, I use it we do a lot of pilots and pitch decks and shows. It's cut my time down by 4 hours on this stuff. I use for show descriptions, I've been using Sounder's new tool, which is still in development. It's in beta, but it uses their contextual targeting. And it's not Chat GPT based. So I really like it because when I get a show description from them, it's in the right tone. It's not, and like they have the right people tagged and the social posts are tagged correctly. So I like that. Oscar, that was at Acast, started a new company, which I think everybody who's in ad sales should be using, Wondercraft, because it can convert anything written into audio with music, and it's really good. It's really neat. You can even put your own voice in. So instead of running these crappy radio ads, convert them to a podcast ad. They're more effective. The listeners like them better. The hosts like them better. But again, it takes these companies to embrace this new technology, and a lot of them aren't. A lot of people in our industry who are on the creative side are pushing back, where, I tell writers and hosts, like, listen, don't push back on it. Learn to use it. Have it help you get better. Don't, just poo-poo it because you think it's taking jobs. It's maybe taking jobs that shouldn't have existed, given the economics of our world anyway. Like the days of doing a 15 episode storytelling podcast that takes 2 years to build and costs hundreds of thousands of dollars are over. Unfortunately, those are the ones I like to listen to, but you got to make them leaner and meaner, and they've got to be on more. They've got to be weekly, bi-weekly at least. It's so funny. These companies don't mind pumping millions of dollars into bringing in celebrities, but when it comes to updating their technology and their the way they do their ads and their promos and making sure they're targeted correctly, it just baffles me.
I totally get it. On one front, when it comes to ads, a company will get a voiceover talent to go in the studio to create the ad, read it for radio. We're going to use it as well for TV. We're going to use it as well online. But then when it comes to podcast, that's a different read. And so I've actually convinced a few companies, I'll record the podcast ad. I'll be the voice of that. I will provide you with the announcer read way to do it, where it's a headphone experience speaking to the listener, not at the listener. And a few people have come around on it and do understand it and have bought into it, which is what I'm going to be putting on Poddle. Right.
Okay.
So it just makes sense that. So thank you for introducing me to that and your newfound invention. That's great.
That is, one of the products that's out there. I mean, there's a lot of great, YouTube creation and YouTube upkeep is a lot of work. Shorts are a daily. So any tools you can use to shorten that load. I think, the companies that are doing combo AI and people to create like TikToks and things like that, those are the companies that are like, that's the way to go. Relying, AI is not something you should rely solely on. It still needs but it needs somebody who understands how to use it. And I think a lot of companies aren't, and it's also bureaucracy and bringing in new tools. You have to go through a million hoops to get anything done. But for a smaller network, and to get back to the network thing, I think this is the time to start a network. If you can pull the content and you can keep it lean and mean, there's money there. There's sales money there. But you need to have a good sales department. You need to find somebody who understands community and selling cross-platform. And you need to be making content for everything. And again, that is an undertaking. It's not, I miss the old days, man. Used to show up at the radio station 4:30 in the morning, prep, go on the air, talk for 4 hours, 11 a.m. I was out. Same thing with podcasts. Used to record it, throw it up there, done. Those days are way over.
Yeah. Radio, they call that 4 and out the door.
Yeah, well, mornings we didn't get to do four and out the door, but it was certainly a lot easier than today. Where there's so much content to be created.
I know there's a lot of people listening to this going, who's this guy Matty, and why is he throwing all these flags about the industry? And I'm here to let you know that by the way, all this sounds completely normal to me because we've both seen this movie before in broadcast and in radio. And if you follow the radio trades, you will see there are companies who have to be rescued from the depths of bankruptcy because of all this stuff. And so in podcasting, we're really beginning to feel that sort of stuff now in an era when you just touched on it. You do need some TikTok, or you need some YouTube, or you need some Reels. And video production is 3, maybe 4 times more expensive than audio creation. So welcome to it. It was already on the margins before, and now it can be expensive to do this.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be using, modern tools. I mean, I'm always impressed with Riverside and, what they keep updating. And when a company like Spotify says, hey, we're moving things over to a company we don't own, I'm sure they bought a big interest in it, but that's a big deal. And that's
or some affiliate marketing.
Yeah. And that was one of the things I got to say I was always proud about, my time at iHeart, is we were very innovative at that time. We were getting into, when it was just Chris Peterson and I, no other radio companies had any dedicated people to podcasting other than us. And they've done a good job in investing in technology and companies to help with that. And I think that's how you have to go. You have to invest in technology. But me, I've been in this industry almost 17 years now, since we started Stitcher. This is my industry. I love it. I feel like, I helped build it, and that's why I get so angry when I see bad players, when I see just bad people, and they're not bad people, but just, the people who are not looking at the long-term, industry. Our industry is still a baby, maybe a toddler at this point. It's still got a lot of way to go. There's still lots of listeners. They still want good content. But we have to, keep that in mind and stop looking at what's the quickest way to make a few bucks off of these poor folks who are trying to start out in podcasting.
Well, it starts with a show, and any show, whether it's a radio show or a radio station or a podcast, it's 3 years to build an audience. And so a lot of people aren't really ready for that. They want to cash out by then, and you're just getting traction after 3 years.
And there's no cashing out for a while there, you could sell shows. And, I have 3 or 4 shows that would have sold 2 years ago that are sitting on the shelf, that we did pilots for that we can't get investment on. It takes time. It takes skill. One of my biggest beefs is I work with celebrities and folks from other industries, and they all just think they know more than us because I make TV. I know this. It's like, yeah, but you don't understand my industry, and I understand my industry, and I know what listeners are. I know who listens to stuff. That's why we're so big on building out personas. And it's why, you and I both know Christian at Potter. That's why I like a company like Potter, which has really done a really good job of creating dashboards of personas of who's listening and where they're at and all of that. That's how I start any podcast process. I don't start with the content. I start with who's listening. It's an old radio thing, and does Bob want to hear this? Yes, Bob likes this content. We'll do this. This is not up Bob's alley. Let's not do that.
What does Bob do for a living? How old is Bob? What teams does he cheer for?
What other shows does he listen to? Why can't he? How much time does he have to listen to podcasts?
What kind of car does he drive?
These are all things that modern podcast creators don't always think of because we still have this stigma that, we should never, the whole phrase, anybody can podcast. Yeah, anybody can, but they shouldn't. It's okay to be a listener. You don't have to be a podcaster. In some ways it gets, I hate to say this. Sometimes I get insulted. I'm like, I've done this my whole life. And you think you can just start something and within 6 months be at a level that somebody that's been doing this forever is at? And don't get me wrong. Some people, natural talent, get in, understand it, can do it. but the majority of folks are just spinning their wheels with content that never had a chance, and throwing money at it. And it kind of makes, I don't, for me, it's like, if you want to make a podcast and do it for fun, great, do it, man. You do all the ones you want. But, when you start, coming and expecting to make money and be at a level where you're making, money off of ads, like, it's a tough road to hoe. I mean, if you're not at 20,000 downloads an episode and you think you're going to make money off of ad sales, you're sorely mistaken.
Which brings me to the Duchess of Sussex, who had a podcast. I think it was on Spotify. Really didn't go anywhere, but Lemonada
and evidently didn't do her own interviews, according to Bill Simmons.
That's right. Yeah. It didn't do well, but there are celebrities out there. I look at a Chris Jericho and a Steve Austin who have, successful podcasts. There's some people who are just great storytellers, and there are other celebrities who just can't get their podcast off the ground. So I guess I'm asking, is the celebrity podcast, are we done with that yet?
No, I mean, I think, we do pilots. And so what we do is we work with these folks to like create a show that's actually going to have legs, and it's something that they'll want to do and keep doing, and actually is up their alley. The podcasts, if you look at that have been successful with celebrities, let's look at Office Ladies or the Always Sunny podcast. They're talking about stuff they really know and that people really want to know about. I don't need another celebrity mom who has 15 nannies telling other mothers how to be moms. Like, gee, many Christmas, I live in these neighborhoods. I live in LA. I don't see any of these people taking care of their own kids. They got 15 nannies walking the kids and stuff. And I'm just using that as an example, but I think those kind of podcasts, like, do we need another celebrity telling us how to be mentally healthy? I don't. Honestly, most of the celebrities I know are the most batshit crazy people I met. But I don't think it's over. But as long as companies are still making these big announcements and spending the money, I look at some companies and their original mission statements and their funding, and then they're putting out celebrity podcasts, and it's like, is that really what you said you were going to do? And but we don't know the details on some, and then some companies really like the press release. That is really all they care about, is having a press release with a big name to bring attention to their company, to bring in more funding.
And the stock goes up.
It is, it's not just let's make money from the podcast game anymore. It's how can we use and leverage the celebrity to up our other shows or up our other things. I think celebrities are great to anchor networks that have podcasters that aren't celebrities. If you can get a good one, there are some, and I know I'm critical a lot of the celebrity podcasts. I mean, I make them. I'm not, I do believe in them because, having somebody, it's the same thing I tell anybody that's new to the business. What kind of following do you have? Okay, you don't have a following. So you do know you have a long road to hoe. Or somebody that's got a huge following, if they can pull that following and make content that following, again, the community likes their community, then that's going to be a successful podcast. But just pulling in a couple of celebs to tell stories about their friends, I think those days are pretty much over. The just rambling, self-important, let me drop names and bring in my, if I see one more, I've seen so many pitches where it is blah, 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 we'll bring in his celebrity friends and they'll talk about their lives. Like, nope.
Some people don't want to consume the celebrity on the audio level. I'm fine just watching you on Instagram. I'm fine watching you on TV. I'm fine consuming you in this other space. Gordon Ramsay, for instance, doesn't need a podcast. I can get him on TV on Fox in a couple hours a week, anywhere.
I mean, and it's about, let's just say if I was Gordon Ramsay and I was going to do a podcast, of course I would do video, and the audio, I would, it's got to be like something that I could only get from Gordon Ramsay, which is dude knows a lot about cooking and being a chef and running a business and running multiple businesses and building an industry out of one business. That's what I would want to hear Gordon Ramsay talk about. Like, that's interesting to me because that is I like self-made people. I don't have a lot of time for people born on third and think they hit a triple. I came from very, very, very meager beginnings in West Virginia. So I take a lot of stock hearing stories from folks who have, people sometimes look at celebrities and don't realize, like, hey, this person worked their ass off to get where they're at. And that's the story I want to hear, not about how awesome their life is now.
I think I can claim that I've been in podcasting since 2007, but hear me out on how I'm going to get there. And that's that I had the foresight to take a morning radio show. I was a program director, and put that up on Apple and into the iTunes store and promote it on the air. And we got some pretty good numbers for that after show. So that was my first podcast experience back in 2007. So I feel like I can say that I've been podcasting since 2007 or had a relationship with it. But I totally love the after show for radio, or what they would call in Britain catch-up radio. And I think you pointed out, using some data from Bumper, that there is still value for radio and the after show.
I started the first one in the United States, as far as I know, in 2007. I'd left my morning show because of the restrictions that were coming in. I did FM talk, and it was like, yes, we can't talk about this anymore. You can't do this. And my host came back and said, I don't know. I'm going crazy. I'm like, start a podcast. I have this new company, Stitcher. We'll put it on there. That podcast ended up doing millions and millions and millions and millions of downloads. And there's about 15 people at CBS who have taken credit for it since then. But I know the host, and I started it. And it's the whole thing. When you have a community and you have what we call in radio a P1, you should service that P1 any way you can. And an after show podcast is 100% servicing that P1. And if your salespeople can't wrap their mind around, these are more valuable than your radio listeners. Because let's be honest with you, the radio ratings, People Meter, Nielsen is bullshit. Bullshit. 1,500 people on a market of 7 million are going to tell me who's listening to what and how long. I don't buy it. Because who takes a people meter? I don't know. I don't know anybody who would take a people meter and carry the thing around. Like, it's usually folks who are on economic hard times, the same folks who want to win stuff on the radio. So they get super served. And while you're super serving them, the actual people who will spend money and want to spend time with good content are left in the dust. And that's radio in the United States in a nutshell. Mornings are the one place where you can still have personality and do that, but you've got to be there for people 24/7, like all their other content. So that means an after show. That means doing YouTube. That means doing, TikTok. But again, if there's nobody there selling it and packaging it, and you're a radio host, why would you do that stuff? You're not getting paid any extra. They'll throw it into your contract maybe, but just because it's in your contract doesn't mean you're going to put a lot of effort into it.
Did we solve the problem about pitching ideas and not having them stolen? And this is an old radio thing, because I used to have to write reports to prospective employers. Give me a report on the radio station and how you would fix it. And then I would send the report off. I wouldn't get the job, but all my ideas would wind up on the air 2 weeks later. Do we have that issue in podcasting?
Of course. I mean, I literally had a company reach out to me about a branded show, and I put together, here's what I would do for this show. And they didn't hire me. And then 3 months later, they launch a show. Exactly the format, exactly everything that I pitched them. I did send them a note and say, hey, I'm glad that you used all my ideas on your podcast, but that's about all I can do. Now, we will do NDAs now, so that, okay, when we talk, it's under a disclosure agreement. You can't use the ideas. I don't do that all the time. In fact, I rarely do it. I'll do it with like a big company, somebody, but I think that has just been the case in creative forever. Everybody claims to have started something. Opie and Anthony, when I worked for them, we did Whip It Out Wednesdays, which horrible. But anyway, that's what we did. Every radio show in the country started doing their version. Flash 'em Fridays or Take 'em Out Tuesdays or something like that.
Okay, I ripped that off too.
Okay, exactly. But you can't get mad at that because, again, imitation is the highest form of flattery. But yeah, it is galling, to do it. And what's happened in radio in the United States is one radio show comes up with one good radio bit, and then everybody does it. And, they all use the same actors, so that the same actors which by the way, if you listen to radio and somebody is calling somebody and they had this fantastic story and they've cheated or something like that, that's all fake. Those are actors, all of it. It's all theater of the mind. You can't call people on the radio and put them on the air without them knowing. Anyway, my class hates it when I point that out to them. But then you end up having cookie cutter morning shows because, this worked here. Let's make every show do it. Even though it might not fit the tone of the show or the people on the show or the audience in that city. Because as you know, cities vary greatly. There's, I look at Mojo and Detroit, a really good friend of mine and somebody I respect immensely in the industry. That dude is Detroit. Knows Detroit. When people leave, they still listen to Mojo. They go online and find Mojo because it's he talks to the city. San Francisco went through a phase where like all the local morning shows basically got, we were one that got, I went back to radio for a little bit to Live 105 and they wanted to bring in a show from LA and it failed miserably. And because people in LA and people in the North, up North are different. They're different folks. People up North hate LA. San Francisco, Oakland, hate LA. Hate everything about it. Hate the people for no good reason. People in LA love the Bay Area, so they don't understand. Like, well, what do you mean you guys don't like this? It's like, you just don't understand. It's ingrained in us not to like it.
We know this story. When people in LA are putting caps on 49ers fans buying tickets at SoFi, yeah, it's on, right?
Just like I'm from Oakland. I will never root for San Francisco. I will never root for the San Francisco Giants. But it's funny. People in San Francisco are like, well, we like Oakland and we like the A's. I'm like, well, that's nice, but that's not how we operate.
So you've said the word community a few times so far. And when people come and talk and pitch about their podcast idea, it's going to be big. It's going to have a lot of this. We're going to get a lot of advertising. It's funny. The word community doesn't come up in those conversations. They're thinking more about downloads and ads. So walk me back to get people thinking about community building and podcasting.
Look at any successful long-term podcast that's out there. And I hate ever using Joe Rogan as an example because he is an outlier. But what is Joe's built a community? There's a community and people are obsessed with him. And it's just like I tell hosts, like, yeah, you can have every celebrity guest on you want, but people won't come back because of that. They come back because they like you. They like the host. They want to be part of this community of a show that you've built. And people forget that. And it's like, again, we have so many products like get guests, have guests, all the guests. It's like, man, if that's all you're relying on, then your show's not good to begin with. A good show isn't, hi, I'm Bob, and today we're talking to so-and-so. Bob, I want to know, well, Bob, what, do I like Bob? I need to like Bob in order to understand, and know that he has a unique perspective on what he does with his guests. When I did radio, when we had comedians and things on, and we were really innovative and in that sense was they would come on and the minute they would start to say like, can you guys set me up for, nope, we do not set you up for jokes. You come in and play. And if you play well, you'll be here for hours. If you don't play well, you'll be here in one segment. Rogan was a great example. Joe would come in and expect to have to do a Fear Factor interview. And we're like, nah, talk about whatever. Then he got into isolation chambers and all this other stuff. And man, we would have Joe on all the time because we knew Joe was good content. He'd just come in and like, here's the news story we're talking about. Joe, what do you think? Blah, 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 blah. But that's, good, I haven't done my morning show in San Francisco in 16 years, something like that. I still have fans who follow everything I do. That's how much of a community we built. And I think that's what's, people forget about podcasting is like, are you interacting with them? And do they want to make you famous? Do they want to tell people about you? That's the most important thing. It's the only thing.
So I did get a chance to go see you at Podcast Movement. You were on a panel, the world famous podcast makeover. And here's what happens in this. The artwork goes on the screen. You get the first 30 seconds of the show to listen to, and then you have to make discernments and judgments about the whole thing. And this is something that has changed over the last number of years. Jacobs Media for a long time put it on. Seth Ressler was moderating it. And you were on the panel. But tell me about artwork and tell me about the first 30 seconds of a show, because I still think it's something we don't talk about enough.
No, in fact, I'm doing a consulting for a brand, a niche podcast network. And their problem is that their hosts just start talking to the guests, and they do things like, tell us about yourself. So remember, you have a finite time for a listener to lock into your show. And yes, it is fun to start off with cute little clips from the show and things like that. But unless they're very captivating, they're not going to interest anybody who's never listened to your show. And those are the most important listeners. Within that first minute, I need to know what the show is, what it's about, who you are, why are you hosting, why should I pay attention to you, and then set the table for the guest. So that by the time, this is why we do all of our intros after interviews. I never, I tell people all the time, I'm like, don't do an intro before an interview, because you don't even know what you're going to tease, because you don't know everything you're going to talk about with that guest. We do them afterwards so that we can really set the table for any guest. I don't care how big they are, so that people were like, oh, can't wait to hear what they say about that. As shows get bigger and grow, yeah, you have more leeway with that stuff. People will come in, but when you're new, you can't afford to lose somebody because and the other thing is the sound quality. When I come on and I here's the host talking, and then the guest is over here, and like, I'm out. I say this all the time. I've never met one podcast listener who has said, I listened to X podcast. It didn't sound good. I'll try them back in 3 months and see if they figured it out. It doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, you hit on about like 5 or 6 things right there, including tell me about yourself. That is, you've lost control of your show the minute you ask that, because the answer could be 8 seconds, but it is often 8 minutes. 8 minutes.
Yeah. And also, people aren't always, I pitch myself all the time. So in 60 to 80 seconds, I can tell you my entire career. Like, that is this. I'm used to doing it. I do it all the time. Most people don't do that. And the other thing is, there might be things interesting about them that they don't say, or they won't know to say. Your job is to say the interesting things so that people want to listen to the podcast, especially if you're relying on guests that nobody's heard of. Like, I've got Dr. John on and we're going to talk about heart health. Who's Dr. John? Where do they work? Why do I care about Dr. John? What kind of insights does Dr. John have that Dr. Bob doesn't have? Those are the types of things.
Yeah. And that's something that you learned in radio. And that's something I also wound up learning, because I was doing a lot of artist interviews, and they were sounding a little bit the same. But then at the same time, some of these bands just weren't interesting beyond the turntable hit we were playing. And I don't mean to finger a band in particular in the 90s, but Tonic was coming into the station.
I have had experiences with Tonic, so tell me. I bet they're the same.
So the band Tonic, you wanted more hits like that, but how was I going to make this interesting to talk? I don't think we can talk about the music very much. We could. It's just not that interesting. So Rolling Stone magazine had a little section on their website that said interesting facts about Tonic, and somebody had posted up there that the lead singer could do armpit farts, 37 different varieties of armpit farts. Well, we had a good radio show that day. It was pretty funny as he demonstrated them all on the air.
Yeah. And that's another thing that AI is good for, is prep. You can find a lot of stuff out about people, and you've got to double check it and all those other things. I love it. I've heard this before in interviews where somebody will ask somebody a question like, oh, you've been on IMDb. Yeah, that's not right. I've been in interviews where it's been said to me, and I've learned my lesson, that I don't ask those obvious things. And what I tell people is, when you're prepping for a guest, if they've done past interviews, go listen to them, go read them. If they have a cool story that they told in that interview, ask them to tell it on your show. Very few people will have listened to the other thing. And then you've got some good content. And my other thing is, when I start an interview with somebody, I call it the Tom Cruise rule, which is, the first time we had Tom Cruise on our show, they were like, just talk about Mission Impossible. Don't do this, don't do that. So my partner, No Name, is a big motorcycle guy. Tom's a big motorcycle guy. Tom had just bought a new motorcycle. And the first question was, Tom, I heard you bought the blah, 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 blah. And you could hear him fucking and smile and go, yeah, oh, let me tell you about this bike. And at the end of the interview, I don't know if you ever did this, we'd always leave them on to hear what they said about us. And Tom was like, I like them a lot. I'll go back on anytime. And we had Tom on probably 6 times, probably more than most radio shows ever got him. And I would say it was that first question, because we showed that we know who we care about Tom as a person, and we have something in common with Tom. And he's not some elevated, like, oh, we got to, follow the rules. And, and guess what? The people who schedule the interview also know, yeah, we got to the movie stuff. We'll always get to the stuff you want to promote. And I will tell that to guests too. Like, listen, I know you want to promote X. Trust me, we will get there, but I want people to like you first. And once they like you, then we'll promote the stuff so that then they want to go do it. People forget that. They just want to start promoting. And it's like, listen, you can promote all day, but if I don't like you, or I don't have a reason to feel like I've connected to you on an empathetic level, why would I go buy your book?
Yeah, and if the listener knows that you're just there to promote, you don't give them a reason to listen, they're not going to stick around to the end. And we've got PPM data in radio to show that happens.
Yeah. And we were the show that just, what radio got rid of was time spent listening. And that to me is the same thing as why I look at podcast consumption rates. It's really the most important thing. Is how much time if you want to spend 30 minutes with me, then I'm doing something right. If you only want to spend 5 minutes of 30 minutes with me, I'm doing something wrong, and I need to fix it.
I've got the honorable distinction of being the only member of the Podcast Academy that has prepaid for the next 2 years. And I did so by
about that.
Yeah. Well, I know because I accidentally hit like submit on my credit card twice. So there I am. I'm now in for the next 2 years. But I know you mentioned it, and I believe you sit on the board. Talk about the Podcast Academy and its and what they're up to.
So, we really in the Podcast Academy want to be, we are the folks that are, want to be there for professional podcasters. And if you follow, our posts on LinkedIn, we're always doing seminars, trainings. The biggest thing about joining the Podcast Academy is the networking. I do the mentorship program, and I would say I've been doing mentorship since we started that in 2020. Almost every time I do a mentorship session, one of the people in the group is somebody I end up doing business with down the road. So it's a great way to make connections with that. The problem is that we just have an apathy of and I'm not pointing fingers, but like, it just seems like the folks we want to get to join, the people who are actually, this is what we do for a living, aren't. And that puts us in a place where we're, constantly trying to raise money, for, to run all these other things that we want to do. There's so much stuff I want to do for the Academy that right now we just can't do because we need more members. So there's certainly a membership push. And again, if you're thought about joining the Podcast Academy or want to join, just reach out to me. That's the other thing. Our board is very accessible, and our board is a lot of heavy hitters. I don't know how I'm on it, but it's a lot of folks who have a lot of weight, and you have access to these folks when you're in the Podcast Academy. And I think that's, it's really important. It's not just a United States thing. It is a global thing. Obviously you're in Canada and you're a member. But I think that's what we're really pushing now is just more of an awareness thing, that we're not just the Ambies. The Ambies are fun and nice and, cool. But that's not all we do. I work on a lot of committees for education and other things. And, my goal was to help bring more knowledge to the people who are working in the industry to make them better.
Yeah. And thanks for mentioning, about the mentorship that goes on. Because you can be a mentor or you can be a mentee, and it's possible to be both. One of the other things I really like is there's a Slack channel. I have a question that needs answered. I'm in contact with people in the industry, and they're in the bottom right corner of my computer, and it's Slack. You guys were there when, Canada passed some legislation that was a little bit worrisome. We don't know if that's going to impact podcasters. And I approached you at the Academy and I said, I think we need to pay attention to this. And we have. And, this stuff does sort of blow itself into a particular direction. And for those of you who are wondering, it's Bill C-10 or Bill C-11, Bill C-18. And, the end result is that news is not being shown on Facebook in Canada. Facebook is just out of the news business. That's the way the legislation goes. We can talk all day about the legislation being wrong. But when I did approach the Academy, they had an interesting approach. They said, let's educate. Let's educate everybody about this before, it gets into advocacy. And, Podcast Academy is something like, advocacy is something that they can stay out of. And I said, well, at what point would they jump in? Let's say Apple and Spotify turn off Canada and there's no podcasts. Do you go in then? I don't know, maybe. Maybe that's what the Podcast Academy has to do. I mean, again, everybody wouldn't like 80% of their downloads in Canada to disappear. So,
and as far as advocacy, like that is something I'd like to see us do more of, especially like, the things we've talked about, like, what are these IAP standards and why are they not being, how are we letting people circumvent them? And again, it doesn't help our industry to do that. Inflating downloads does not help our industry, but we can't do those kind of things if we don't have enough members to support us to do them. That is kind of the position we're in right now. You can get 30, there's plenty of deals. It's not that expensive. I think it's $100 a year, but with codes and things, you can get that down to, stuff. And also if you have not only, one of the things I really pushed is, we give free memberships for underserved communities. And one of the underserved communities in the United States that is always overlooked is my community of Appalachia. We are a minority of people in the States that are still made fun of, and it's okay to make fun of. I can't tell you how many times I mentioned I'm from West Virginia, and the first thing out of somebody's mouth is hillbilly, incest, or teeth. I
had dental plan, by the way, on that. He's going to mention teeth, right? And so I knew that, right? So the stereotypes are there.
And it really, I'm not in the point where I laugh at that stuff anymore. I will point out to folks that those are really horrible stereotypes. And if I go back home and it breaks my heart, and I tried as much as I can to get back to Appalachia. I'm very proud to be from Appalachia, but I bring all that up is that, at the Academy, we're not just, we're giving, when we say we're serving underserved communities, it's everybody. It's not just LGBTQ and BIPOC creators, but also underserved, economically underserved communities. That's why, I do a lot of work with inner city folks and folks that have been in prison. And one of the, when I talk to people, they're like, what do you have in common with those folks? You grew up in a trailer park. And I'm like, I have everything in common with them because we grew up in areas where we had no way to get out. You have 3 or 4 options: join the military. We used to have places you could work. You don't have that anymore in Appalachia. The mines are closed. There's no factories. There's more coming in. There's a lot of stuff coming in, but getting out is daunting, to say the least. I was lucky. My mother refused to let me date in high school. She was like, nope, not knocking anybody up, and you're getting out of here. I went to college, came back home the next week, didn't have a bedroom anymore. I was out the door.
Yeah. I mean, and the complications of that, I mean, we're talking about poverty. And at one point, you can exhaust some jokes, but once it starts to intercede and go into like multiple generations with the same issue, it's not funny anymore.
And there is trauma that is genetically brought down. I think, people understand that when it comes to African Americans in slavery, and that there is a trauma that is carried through genetically. And I will say the same thing for Appalachians as well, that we have a chip on our shoulder. We are pessimistic. I've been watching the show. I love the show, Welcome to Wrexham, which is about a Welsh soccer team. And I watch it and I go, oh, now I understand West Virginia. Because we were founded by a lot of Welsh people and Italians. And I'm like, they brought their crappy attitudes over here too. Because always finishing second, never making it. Everybody puts us down, that kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, we have so much in common.
I would think one of the problems in Appalachia would be internet access.
That is it. And also education, in my state, if you have a heartbeat, they'll pretty much let you be a teacher at this point. And few people want to do it because they don't pay. So it starts there, with education. I'm lucky that, I had my mom and dad were very well educated, and also my mom tended to answer questions with, "Here's a book, go read it." You want to know? Go to the library. Here it is. And when I was in school, the education system was much better, but now, I have friends that are teachers, and I try to give back and do some stuff with my high school in my hometown. And, if I had money, if you gave me $2 million, I would immediately start putting podcast studios in high schools in West Virginia, because we are the one thing about Appalachians we're the best storytellers. My wife went home with me the first time, met our neighbor Gene, and Gene told her a story about going downtown and getting eggs. And it took 20 minutes for him to tell the story, and it was riveting. And she's like, "I get it. I understand you. You people tell stories." I'm like, that's his first, wait till 2 weeks from now. That story will be even better, So we have this rich history of storytelling. And it is also a way that I have found over the years, storytelling and talking. And, that's a way to really exercise a lot of those demons and to get a sense of self-esteem and pride in being from Appalachia. Like, I take pride in being from Appalachia, where a lot of folks will, and I didn't for a long time. Man, when I went out the door, I was out the door. It was in my mirror, like, woof, got out of there. But as I got older, I'm like, no. I'm very lucky I grew up where I grew up, and the sense of family and pride and community that was built into me from my hometown is part of my DNA.
Are you still consulting independently?
Yeah. So networks, individuals, especially, folks that are like trying to figure out the new technology and how to use it. And then, we do the pilot production for, folks who want to sell a show to a network. They are still buying shows. But these days you can't just have a deck and say, "Here you go." No, you need to show it. You have to have a pilot, show video, all of that kind of stuff. So we're doing that. And I have started to dip my toe back into the branded space a bit. So we're doing some of that as well, but also looking for a job because I miss people working in a company. Entrepreneurship is in my DNA. It'll always be my DNA. Podl will be, I love that. I'm going to have, that's another reason why we haven't taken any funding, is like, we want it to be ours. We want to build it the way we want to build it and do it the way we want to do it. So yeah. Short answer, yes.
Good. That's pretty much where we started too. So, hey, Matty, thanks a lot for doing this. I really appreciate it. And all those things that we've spoken about, whether it was Podl or to get in touch with you for consulting or for anything and everything, Matty, it's all in the show notes of the episode.
Thanks, Matt. Love being on with you, brother.
Thank you.
The Sound Off Podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Edited by Chloe Emo Lane. Social media by Aiden Glassy. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.